Okay, here we go. So, hi, this is Shock Exchange, and this is Trump and the GE, where we discuss the economy, issues important to the community. And today we will discuss Barbarians at the Gate for Endo International. This will be Barbarian number 5. We've been basically we think Endo is a generics pharmaceutical company. We think it's highly undervalued, and we think that Endo has a fiduciary responsibility to buy back its shares hand over fist. We think other pharmaceutical companies who either have a presence in the aesthetic space or want a presence in the aesthetic space should be buying Endo shares hand over fist as well. It's a fiduciary responsibility to put capital to work at a high ROI, and we think that if Endo is buying back its own stock, every dollar it puts into the stock, it would get those dollars back tenfold, because we think Endo's intrinsic value is at least 10, probably right now, probably like 7 to 8 times where it is now. We think it's probably about $25 to $30 a share. It's intrinsic value. So we think Endo and competitors have a fiduciary responsibility to buy the stock. So there have been some goings on since the last time we spoke about Barbarian number 6, but we identified about 8 companies that we think would be strong candidates to buy Endo either outright or make a strategic investment, and buy the rest once the opiate overhang subsides. But the other goings on is that the state of Louisiana settled with Endo and Teva for about $8 million and $15 million respectively, and Teva is also putting up some free drugs. So that was interesting goings on. All the other states most of the states have settled with the big distributors, big opiate distributors, and Johnson & Johnson. Now you're seeing them settle with Endo and Teva. So it could be a cascade of settlements coming down the pike, hopefully. This could set off another round of settlements prior to Endo's earnings. The other thing of note was that Louisiana is putting all the funding into the parishes for treatment and prevention. Previously, the other states were saying they would put maybe 10 to 15% would go into state coffers. Louisiana is putting all the money into the parishes for treatment and prevention. That's another big development. Missouri, the Missouri AG is promoting its global settlement, and the AG in Missouri is putting all the money into the states, into the municipalities for treatment and prevention. So I understand none of the money is going to state coffers.
Yeah.
So those are two big developments from Missouri and Louisiana. They stepped it up, and they may put pressure on other states to put all the money into treatment and prevention, which was the point all along. It also could, again, lead to a cascade of settlements, because these state AGs are getting a lot of publicity for these settlements. They're getting a lot of publicity for being compassionate and putting the money where the harm occurred, just like Judge Polster wanted. State AG of New York, Letitia James, is upstate right now. She's handing out checks left and right. State has settled for $1 billion plus about $50 million from Endo International. I don't think this includes fund money from Purdue Pharma or Mallinckrodt. I think they got $1 billion from the big distributors in Johnson & Johnson.
Right.
But anyway, she's been in Syracuse, Rochester, Monroe County, Buffalo, New York, handing out checks. And she's making speeches like she's sounding like she's about to run for governor. The media is speculating whether she's going to make a gubernatorial run as well. We speculated here whether she was using the opiate litigation as publicity for a run for governor. So now it seems to be playing out. There's chatter that she's actually spoken to some donors about whether they would support a gubernatorial run. So everything is set except for an announcement. She's done everything but make an announcement that she's officially throwing her ring into the hat for governor. I guess how these talks go upstate New York could determine whether she officially runs. And so the interim governor, Hochul, I think is how you pronounce it.
Right.
She's also making moves. She recently announced that she's taking steps to prevent opiate addiction and overdose. So this is an article from the Daily News where it says, last week, Governor Hochul signed a number of smart, compassionate measures to combat the dramatically escalating opiate crisis, alluding to her own personal experience of losing her nephew to an overdose. Mm. So she's talking about her nephew, also nephew to an overdose. So she's actually connecting to the public. That this is not just a public thing. It touches everybody in all parts of society, even to the higher levels of government, that it's a personal issue for her in some regards. It says, we're treating people who suffer from an illness like they're criminals, Hochul said, in reference to bills that decriminalize needle possession, mandate medication-assisted treatment in prisons, prevent the possession of opiate reversal drugs from being used against defendants in court, and give judges more latitude to put people in diversion programs instead of ordering incarceration. So she is actually setting policy to decriminalize drugs and to deal with the opiate epidemic from that standpoint. And, decriminalize people using hypodermic needles in public, so on and so forth. So she's setting policy to help the public address this epidemic, and she may be trying to take some of the shine away from State AG Letitia James. Why the State AG didn't recommend these policies earlier, I'm not sure. But while Letitia James is handing out money, the interim governor is actually setting policy that maybe the state, that the public can actually see and feel directly, individually.
Right.
Where what Letitia James is doing is giving money to treatment and prevention centers, and then it trickles down over time. But Hochul seems to be trying to connect to the public directly through new policies, which we think should have been put in place a long time ago. There was no reason to criminalize crack cocaine decades ago, because it's a medical problem, and African Americans have been saying that for years. Now that the opiate epidemic is hitting other segments of society, now all of a sudden everybody wants to be compassionate,
right,
and recognize it's a medical problem. But my only point is that State AG Letitia James, State AG for Louisiana, State AG for Missouri seem to be getting a lot of publicity for these opiate settlements. It seems to be a jockeying for position in New York for governor. So current governor is trying to get publicity from an opiate settlement and dealing with opiate epidemic. The only issue is you can't get publicity from an opiate settlement if you haven't actually settled yet. Right. So it could prompt more state AGs to go from a combat mode to actually settlement and putting money into these communities for treatment and prevention, which means there could be a cascade of settlements for Endo and Teva over the next couple of weeks. I think there could be settlements around Louisiana for Endo, whether it's Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Arkansas. Or it could be a global settlement, hopefully prior to earnings or on the earnings date for early July. The other thing is that as these settlements have come in, it seems like there's been the level of short sales on a daily basis seems to be dissipating. Mm-hmm. So as short sales dissipate, it could be opportunity for Endo's share price to actually creep up to closer to its fair value prior to earnings. So that's sort of the high level goings on between the last time we talked about Barbarian number 6. So I'll let Mr. Mitchell weigh in.
Yeah, no, it's been it's been a lot going on over the last 2 weeks, which it feels like it's been longer than that, because we've been tracking this thing for the last really 4 years at this point. So it's been kind of a long road, but the culmination of really the last 3.5 years leading to this point, but now everything seems to be happening in rapid succession. That first domino simply needed to fall, and now the subsequent dominoes are falling at a faster rate, which ultimately is a good thing, because even with the political jockeying between Letitia James and the current interim governor after Cuomo's kind of scandal surrounding sexual harassment and assault, and Hochul was the lieutenant governor and obviously stepped in place, but made an extremely bold announcement and has strong support amongst her state congressmen that they don't necessarily have a desire to replace Hochul, but between, and for folks outside of New York, there's always been a bit of contention between New York City and New York State. It often runs almost like two completely separate entities, as if one doesn't have anything to do with the other. I think the country got a glimpse of that during the pandemic, because there was a literal standoff between Cuomo, and which was state governor, and Mayor de Blasio, which is the mayor of New York City. And while the rest of the state was closing down, the governor had issued a shutdown, lockdown because of COVID. Meanwhile, de Blasio kept New York City open. So, it was certainly kind of city versus state, and that has been a rather long tradition. Hence kind of this battle between Letitia James and Hochul, simply because New York State often looks at New York City as a completely different animal, completely different beast. Political leanings are different, way of life is very different. So there's often this political contention, and it shows up. But at the end of the day, I actually think it's a win-win for the community members at large, because while you have, I've said it before, and I continue to stand on my square, that to me, the feet dragging that Letitia James was committed to by not getting a deal done as quickly as possible, because it's not as if Endo was obfuscating, was dancing around. They admitted their participation, in other words. So you had someone sitting on the other side of the table that was openly saying, yes, we participated in the current crisis, and we're ready to take responsibility for it. So that was, half the battle. I would even venture to say that's really 3/4 of the battle there. And the last quarter of the battle was just simply negotiating a number at that point. And we watched just this foot dragging on and on and on. And it was just nonsensical to me. I was constantly looking like, what is the reason here? What are they hoping to gain? And I've, said it numerous times here that, Letitia James must be politicized, because for me, that was the only logical choice left out of the options of choices of why a state AG. What's the motivation for dragging this process out when victims are still dying, are still having a hard time getting to treatment options, and even less options for preventative measures. So all while this is happening, the state AG, there was almost very little movement to get these things settled. So for me, it became clear that this must be a political point for her in order to climb a potential gubernatorial run, or maybe even higher. At the time, it wasn't well known, but since then it's been made very clear on both sides that she was seeking donor support behind the scenes, testing the waters to see what her support would look like throughout the rest of the state. Ironically, a lot of the donors that she was tapping were Cuomo's former donors. So, she made her stance known, and ultimately we see what that has led to. And Hochul is equally made a stand, and she has a very strong presence. Seems like she has very strong support throughout the rest of the state. So really, the combination of this political clash has really led to the two things that folks need, municipalities need, support services need, organizations need, which is both policy and money. So, Hochul is coming in with the policy, and Letitia James is dropping off bags of cash trying to buy votes. But listen, it is what it is. I think it's truly a win-win for the community at large to leverage to get the resources that they need. The thing that we have been constantly saying over and over again. So yeah, that's kind of the way that I look at it. To your earlier point, hopefully it does serve as an example. I think we saw that with Louisiana State AG by just simply handing over every dime over to the municipalities, the counties that have been affected the most by it. Because frankly, let's be clear that an AG, you're the top cop in the state, and most cops, I think, know at this point. And for those that don't know, that police are simply the enforcement arm of the existing law. The difference between a state AG and a beat cop is that one can actually influence policy. One can actually influence the laws that are to be enforced. And that's where the state AG comes in, that certainly the decriminalization of addiction, the decriminalization of opioid usage, in other words, could have already been implemented. Like, that's something that the state AG could have really rallied behind, and I think even just politically, she probably would have won more points had she rallied behind such policy changes throughout the state even 3-4 years ago, in other words. So I think she would have, had some memorable favor for folks outside of New York City, certainly, which is really the biggest influence for a governor. But the long and short is that, yes, I hope that AGs across the country are viewing that missed opportunity for them to step up to the plate and to take that opportunity and fill that gap, because without policy changes, we're just going to see the same play with different actors. We're moving from opioids already to fentanyl. There's going to be something that has to fill a gap. So whether it's heroin based, we move to cocaine based, it's always going to be something next. Why? Because people will continue to feel pain. They'll continue to go into surgery. They'll continue to need medical care. They'll continue to go through physical, psychological, and emotional pain. And if something, in other words, until that need is met and eliminated, there will always be opportunity for a new player to fill a gap. So without policies in place that address the addiction side, address the treatment side, decriminalize, as I've stated before, Portugal was the first the first country that decriminalized all drugs across the board. And within a year, they saw even drug usage dropped by over 40%. So clearly decriminalizing drugs, it works. There have been advocates for decades, like you already alluded to. Even the black community has been saying that for decades. But I think we're seeing a shift just across the board within the criminal justice system. And this is one piece in the bigger pie of reformation of the criminal justice system, which I largely welcome, because this means that we should see less folks behind bars, especially less folks that look like us. There are more black people in prison than entire populations on the globe. And over 60% of those convictions are typically drug-related convictions. So obviously for our community, this is going to be a significant windfall if there's an across-the-board decriminalization of drugs, and we treat it as such, that this is a medical condition. This is something that needs to be treated with therapy, treated with social services, not treated with handcuffs and jail cells, because that doesn't treat anything at all. So yeah, that's the thing that I've been kind of excited to see, is some of that change. But like you said, we've been watching some pretty low volume. Interestingly enough, right? There's been this dichotomy over the last couple of weeks. The volume for Endo has dropped off And, as I've stated, I think offline a couple of times, shorts must see something coming, right? Because they've been so emboldened for the last year. I'm quite sure they're not listening to us, so it ain't us.
Right.
They're clearly not listening to us. So there's something that is taking the wind out of their sails a bit, and we have been noticing that the short sales have been decreasing dramatically day by day. Excuse me. We already saw that over 4 million shares between when the short interest is updated. So short interest is only updated about twice a month. So usually we try to track as closely as possible a few times a week to try to keep up with the real number and time. But just between the previous update of the short interest and the current update of short interest, we see about 4.5 million shares have been covered. A lot of these, a lot of this coverage is happening in dark pools, clearly, because there's no way that you cover 4.5 million shares in an open market. And this thing only moves $1 or $2. Folks would argue that just the pressure of 4 million shares being covered alone should be enough to send this significantly closer to fair market value, which we've, stood behind this many years of having a $25 to $30 price target, which we believe is an extremely conservative price target. And when we announced that price target, this was even before generic Chantix, before the rollout of Quo. So just between those two pipeline products, $25 is even more conservative than when it was first announced, in other words. And Endo is already, stated that we're looking at about another 17 to 20 drugs coming down, drugs and treatments coming down the pipeline over the course of the next 24 months. So, it's pretty much blue skies from this point moving forward. But for whatever reason, all of that, because, for the folks that do tune in, which we appreciate, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share while it's on my mind. So we definitely appreciate the folks that do take some time to listen. Even the critics, we welcome the critics. We even welcome the haters. We appreciate the audience. So even with those folks that do listen and tune in, nothing that we're saying is brand spanking new. I feel like every time we talk about Endo, a lot of it is redundant. So you would clearly know that this, this company is only strengthened in the last year, and yet we've watched pretty much a $9 decline from the beginning of the year up until its lowest, which was about $1.93. I want to say maybe about a month and a half or 2 months ago, roughly. So we've watched a $9 drop. So clearly, shorts have been incredibly emboldened. We have yet to see any Centron report type news come out, which I've been, standing on the soapbox, kind of beating my chest. Like, if there is something, if there's a big scary boogeyman, let the shareholders know. Like, let folks know that here's the reason why it makes sense that we think that this thing should be trading at $2 a share, $3 a share, or even at current levels at $4 a share. Here's why we think it should be lower. The shorts that rightfully so called out Lordstown, trades under the ticker RIDE, even called out RLX because of the crackdown on which was RLX was, I think, the biggest vape company in China. but trying to crack down on what's known as ethical businesses, and sent the share price obliterating, because it was trading in the 60s and it went all the way down to I think like $2 or $3. But shorts kind of called it out. So in other words, clearly shorts typically have a history of rightfully being some of the canaries in the mines, letting folks know, hey, here's what we're seeing that doesn't quite match up to what management is saying, what the financials are saying. So if that's the case, why haven't we seen this for Endo, in other words? And, in spite of not producing any evidence that would support an argument that this should continue to be shorted, they've continued to short. So, with all that being said, we have to assume that shorts must see something coming, right? Like shorts must clearly have tapped their networks. Because I think most of us know that there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. Some of those behind the scenes got exposed with the whole Robinhood debacle with GameStop earlier, and how much markets are manipulated. The public got a good sense of that. So, I think it would be naive of us to believe that, simply the exposing of the congressional hearing was the only tactic. And that's the thing, that shorts have many, many, many tactics, that market makers have many tactics, and frankly, kind of the financial elite have many tactics. With that being said, we understand that they clearly have pretty deep networks. And when they are able to see something long before the public, long before markets respond, simply because they have well-oiled networks, they're going to move accordingly. And looking at the boldness that shorts have had over the last year, I think all signs point to they must know something, right? They must see something that is now pulling the wind out of their sails and saying, okay, guys, party's over. Let's start to wrap this up. Simply because whatever this thing is that's coming down the pipeline is going to not only eat into the profits that we've made so far by continuing to short this, but potentially looking at massive losses at hand. And I'm quite sure that no one is seeking to be the next Melvin Capital on that Summer Jam screen. Shouts out to my 80s and 90s babies that remember Summer Jam. You're not trying to be the next one losing $6 billion in 24 hours. Right. Because of, simply because of arrogance at the end of the day. So, we think that shorts know something. Could it be? There's been some interesting news that's happened over the last week as well in regards to some conversations of potential acquisitions. So, could it be that one of the Barbarians is starting to not only bang at the gate, but have started to kick in the gate and and maybe have a toe in the gate? We can only speculate that maybe that is one possibility, but certainly if it is a possibility, then that would be the thing that would obviously send shorts into not only eating into profits, but facing some significant losses at that point.
Exactly. So yeah, thank you for that. So basically, these 8 barbarians we've identified, including the one we're talking about today, do not include Novavax and Moderna, who we talked about for a while, that need to diversify that revenue away from the vaccines. And Novavax's vaccine hasn't even garnered emergency use authorization yet. So, but they do have a lot of capital. They've garnered a lot of vaccine sales, or garnered, I guess, pre-sales, shall we say, people who already ordered for the vaccine. So they have
Yep.
billions of capital available, and they need to diversify revenue. I don't think they're going to find too many companies that are even financially attractive at these levels. With the Dow at 35,000,
Yeah.
Endo trades under 7 times EBITDA, and the EBITDA is understated because it doesn't include generic Chantix, and it doesn't include growth for Xiaflex, or the upward movement for Crow, which will probably grow through leaps and bounds, and plethora of products that Endo has in the pipeline. So, and also, I mean, I'm wondering, like, if you're an M&A team for a big pharma company, what do you do if you let Moderna or Novavax invest in Endo first and beat you to the punch, even though you've known about how attractive the aesthetics market is, and you've known about the potential disruption of Quo for years. So anyway, so on to Barbarian number 5. Barbarian number 5 was a big pharma company. Ironically, its biggest product line, probably not even subject to regulation. I won't give too much away because I don't want anybody to know who we're talking about. But its biggest product line, it generated Q2 21 revenue of over $2 billion, and it grew 26% year over year. And that's likely partially due to the pandemic. As we're coming out of the pandemic, the economy is reopening and more people are returning to doctors' offices. So that 26% revenue growth could be a little overstated. It could flatten out over time as the economy continues to reopen. But its largest product grew revenue over 30%, which is phenomenal. And it's not necessarily regulated like most drug companies, so it can hike prices. And there aren't that many competitors. So it's in markets where there aren't that many competitors, and they have a lot of pricing power. So it's almost like a consumer business more so than a healthcare business in the way we think of it. Its second biggest product grew 28% year over year. It has what they call a dermatologic business, which is pretty small in terms of total revenue, but it generates about over $100 million in revenue. It grew double-digit rates in Q2, and it represents about 6% of total revenue, which is pretty small in grand scheme of things, but it represents about 7% of segment profits. So its segment profits grew over 60%. So it has its segment profits are expanding, maybe due to pricing power, maybe due to cost cuts, and the fact that we're coming out of the pandemic. So this company, it's like a lot of companies, it was buying other pharmaceutical companies to hire the market. And it had to, as is one of its biggest products, revenue for one of its biggest products started to decline as the government began to look askance on companies hiking prices for the sake of hiking prices.
Yeah.
And to hiking prices to grow revenue, and hiking prices to cover debt service costs for acquisitions that they overpaid for. And we talked about Monstrelli on here. Monstrelli was caught up in that. Mallinckrodt was caught up in that. Mallinckrodt ended up going belly up. But this company was able to survive because it had a diversified revenue stream. It also was able to hive off assets at the height of the market. So the fact that the stock market was rising and the government was, the Trump administration cut taxes, it helped this company's balance sheet. It helped get rid of some of its tax liabilities. It also helped this company, help Barbarian number 5 sell assets at the height of the market to pay debt, and it needed to sell those assets. Otherwise, this may be a much different story. But it's been, it's what some people call optionality, because its equity is so small relative to its debt. It still has over $20 billion in debt, and it's generating a lot of cash flow right now, and seems to have a strong pathway to continue to generate cash flow, because its top products are still growing. So as long as it continues to generate cash flow, it can continue to service its debt. The story remains intact that this company has optionality. Its dermatologics business, again, is pretty nascent, 6% of total revenue. But it could be at risk, in my opinion. I'm going to describe its dermatologics business. It has what it calls some type of skin tightening treatment, where they use radio frequency technology to heat the skin and to help tighten the skin. So it actually heats up the skin and uses radio frequency technology. And I think this company could be in Quo's crosshairs. It's almost like a body contouring sort of concept. It also uses equipment, aesthetic equipment, medical aesthetic equipment to help deliver this treatment. So not only could the revenue stream be at risk, but also the equipment used to deliver this treatment could also be at risk in terms of to the extent that doctors have to actually pay for equipment. So Hologics actually hived off their body contouring business. They sold it for for cheap to a private equity firm because it was already treading water. And I think this company's aesthetics business could be vulnerable, particularly vulnerable to Quo, because Quo, from what I understand, could also be used for body contouring as well. So not only could it be used to treat cellulite, but it could be used to treat body contouring. And this is what Endo's management said a couple years ago. They said that they think it's aesthetics, Quo could be disruptive to the entire $15 billion aesthetics market. And that's a big comment coming from Endo's management team, because they tend to be very conservative, and for them to say something like that, they must be very sure of that.
Yeah.
And the aesthetics market back then was about $15 billion, growing briskly. And so I think those body touring companies could be at risk for being disrupted by Quo. But we'll soon find out. I think Hologic's already experienced that. And so again, if you look at what we call the aesthetics business for Endo, would be Xyraflex and Quo, because Quo is kind of nascent at this point. It's only been around for 1 quarter. It's only been in Endo's reported. It's only been reported in Endo's revenue and earnings for 1 quarter, but it's expected to grow by leaps and bounds. Its revenue was about $120 million in Q2. In total, combined, Barbarian number 5 and Endo's aesthetics business generated about $260 million in revenue. And Endo would represent about 47% of that total revenue. However, it would probably amplify the combined business's revenue growth from 17% to 32%. So Barbarian number 5 aesthetics business growing about 17%. Combined with Endo, it would grow like 32%. I think Endo's revenues probably grow about 50%. That's being very conservative, because the upside for Quo is almost hard to quantify. But at a high level, Barbarian number 5 has several $100 million to make an acquisition. It has over $1 billion in unrestricted and total cash. That includes restricted cash. I think it has to make a move at some point, because if the economy turns down, some of its businesses, some of its what I call almost like consumer-like businesses, may experience headwinds, and it may be difficult for it to service debt going forward. But at the end of the day, they have to. All these big pharma companies have to be able to put capital to the work at a high ROI. They're not going to be able to make an acquisition like Endo, and it could be a defensive measure where they could actually defend its own aesthetics business by buying Endo, and also ward off other potential big pharma companies who want to enter the aesthetic space. So I think it's only a natural fit, because it's already in the aesthetic space, and it would be defending its current position. Even though it's nascent, it could be combined with Endo. It could be I think it would be another major catalyst for this company.
Yeah, one, to your earlier point. So actually, they have a couple of billion in cash on hand just in the last quarter.
But some of it's restricted, though.
Right. It's a combination of they have about 1.4 billion in unrestricted. But also they have another 350 million because they reduced their debt just back in August. So they have another 350 million in cash because of that debt reduction that they were able to get off of the books. So to the point of an ROI, where you have cash on hand what do you do with that cash? Do you buy back stock at this point? Which where they're trading at, it would be a hard argument to make if you're using Endo as a comparison. Like who do you buy? Do you buy a cheaper winner that can have the potential to eclipse your current dermatological market, or do you buy back shares and sure, shareholder value will increase in the short term, but I think shareholders would venture to agree that the better play would be to buy the cheaper winner that can essentially hurt profits of Barbarian number 5 longer term. The other factor that we're seeing really with a lot of the body contouring services is that not only is the cost of entry, so to kind of give it a range, looking at about anywhere from about $1,500 up to about $5,000 per treatment of some of these body contouring services. However, it's almost listening to some of the clients and the customers of body contouring, which the majority of them, over 96% of those that do the body contouring are women. That's who is heavily marketed towards. Obviously, there are some men, but clearly women make up the large majority of the purchasers of that service. And one of the things that has to be acknowledged is that because this is a non-invasive, because it's not a medicinal process, that this is also not a long-lasting process. Most of these body contourings make a proclamation of 8 to 12 weeks. What we're seeing is that obviously that's going to be dependent on that individual's health, their diet, other medicinal factors, their health history, family history, that impacts the way a treatment will last. And one of the things that we've noticed is that the time period that is being made or marketed to last is no longer lasting as long. So now that means that you have to go back more frequently. And one of the things that you have to, especially if you're in a multinational company, you have to have economists on hand, because you have to have a world outlook, aka a macroeconomic outlook that is going to potentially impact sales, right? How does what's happening in the UK, in Australia, in Europe, in Africa affect a U.S. company, and vice versa? And a lot of these multinational big biopharma companies have economists on hand to do just that. And one of the things that cannot be ignored is some of the macro effects that we constantly talk about, is that when you're looking at stagnating wages, just a week ago, it was announced over 4 million workers quit the labor force over the summer. We're looking at rising labor strikes across several different industries. So the labor participation rate is declining in real time. We are also, we've already talked about how QE is ending, so no longer do you have the Fed continuing to prop up the markets. The markets have already responded. Even banks, multinational banks, Deutsche Bank, Chase, are already putting out, as early as 4 or 5 months ago at this point, that hyperinflation is on the way, and that they are warning the Federal Reserve, other banks, and essentially this is their warning that, hey, essentially shit is getting ready to hit the fan if something is not done on a policy level, because the only way to stop this from happening, the crash course that we're on, is that massive policy changes must happen that is going to impact the everyday family. And let's be very clear, over 90% of the people in this country would fall under the umbrella of working class. So these are the same folks that a biopharma is marketing to when it comes to body contouring, in other words. So they're not out of the realm of reality or exist in some alternate universe where all of these macro economic effects can be happening, and yet their bottom line continues to increase and increase unabated. So in other words, the discretionary income, because that's really what the aesthetics business, as we've stated before, that's what the aesthetics business is predicated on, is discretionary income. But if the discretionary income of your customer base continues to decline, and you have a service that is not lasting as long as you have marketed it to last, then what do you think is going to happen to your revenue? Is naturally going to decline. So that's something that a lot of these body contouring companies, even medical offices and aesthetic clinics, they are dealing with that as we speak. So this is to me, a clear pathway for Barbarian number 5 to be able to scoop up a competitor that will arguably knock out potentially the body sculpting industry. I think there will be some room for body sculpting to still exist, because while the removal of cellulite is a type of body contouring, for those that are unfamiliar, cellulite are often seen by those extra fatty deposits that are usually viewed on the legs, the abdominal area, etc. So removing any extra fatty tissue becomes a natural contouring effect, in other words. However, will it completely rule out body contouring altogether? Because, for example, I'm sure there's going to be some percentage of a demographic that want to, get rid of maybe that last inch. They've already gotten rid of the cellulite. They've continued to diet and exercise, and feel like, hey, there's still some room there that can be reduced, but these other options aren't producing the effects that they want to see. So maybe the body sculpting becomes an option for that percentage of folks. But arguably, the question is going to become, in a very real way, in very real households, is how much is that inch worth? Like, if I can get that inch off for $3,000, but that inch is only going to come off for the next 3 weeks, that's the decision that households and essentially Barbarian number 5's customer base is going to have to make. And that's not a position that you necessarily want to be in as Barbarian number 5. So this is a great way to bolster up your product line if I'm Barbarian number 5, and be able to have both options on the table, and even an opportunity to package them together. That after the cellulite treatment, then here's another package for the body contouring for that last inch. But in other words, there are a myriad of ways to be able to include a kind of symbiotic relationship. But the only way that's going to happen is by, either buying out the company outright or scooping up some shares, even at these levels, for criminally cheap or on the dollar. So, I just wanted to make that point, because that's really what the entire aesthetic space is facing. In other words, is that very real scenario of declining wages and, more importantly, declining discretionary income.
Yeah, yeah, those are all fair points. I mean, consumer spending again represents about 67% of GDP, and consumers were spending over the past decade. Will they continue to spend after the pandemic? I think the pandemic was a commercial for consumers that who now realize they probably can't go but so many paychecks before things get pretty tight. So if they have to tighten the belt, what do they cut back on?
Right.
And they may be cutting back on aesthetics related products. So you have a potential headwind for consumer spending. You have a potential headwind for the aesthetic space. And then you have a jockeying position of the body contouring firms, like who's going to be the winner. So who's going to dominate the body contouring space. And then you have Quo, which is the only FDA injectable for cellulite. The cell for body contouring that is less invasive, but even Quo is even less invasive than body contouring because you don't have to go on the machine or anything. And it's the only FDA approved injectable, and it could disrupt. It could perform some of the services, have some of the same effects that body contouring has. So it could be disruptive for body contouring and the entire aesthetic space, which Endo's management expects. So I think over the next few quarters, I think people are going to have questions for Barbarian number 5 pursuant to its dermatologic business, as well as other people in the aesthetic space. What's the outlook for the aesthetic space, and also, how do they see Endo potentially disrupting the space, and how do they see pricing and margins for the aesthetic space going forward? So I think there's a way to not only defend its current position, but to also it could become the disruptor if Barbarian number 5 buys Endo, and they have the capital to do it. They have the capital to do it, and if they miss out on this opportunity, whoever gets to Endo first, I think it could trigger questions for the other big pharma companies that didn't make this move, especially after we're trying to connect those dots for the public and try to connect these dots for investors and for obviously for Endo, because they need to defend their stock price. Hopefully they're buying shares hand over fist and not going to let anybody acquire for cheap. And also for the big pharma companies who need to, find a ways to find the next catalyst and to put capital at work pretty efficiently. So that's sort of my take on Barbarian number 5. It hasn't been acquisitive. I understand it hasn't been acquisitive. It's been trying to pare debt. It's actually been hiving off assets. Now that it's proven that it can, hive off assets at market heights, pare debt, and drive cash flow, now it's time to become, I think could be time to become more aggressive and actually start putting capital to work within its core competencies. So that's sort of my take. So I'll give Mr. Mitchell one last parting shot on Barbarian number 5.
Yeah, I think, as we state every time we do one of these, hopefully Endo is battening down the hatches. Because, as we've seen already, there are shareholder activists within other companies that are kind of standing on the tables and beating their chests that they should be making some strategic acquisitions at this point. And, Endo has been a part of that conversation with other shareholders. So, this isn't something that we're just speculating for the sake of speculating. This is something that is speculated because it's a conversation that is happening even amongst shareholders within other biopharma companies and large multinational companies that have the cash on hand to make strategic acquisitions. So, in other words, if I'm Endo, certainly Endo's management, Endo's board, do I want to be bought out at these levels? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's no other way to say it, simply because even again, just over the last 4 years, if Endo were to be bought out today, would you feel satisfied as a board member, even as Endo's management, certainly a shareholder, would you feel satisfied with all of the work that is taken to get Endo out of a drowning position and not just head above water, but at this point in the boat and also driving the boat? So Endo board, the management, the workers have done a fantastic job at pulling this company up and getting it on a clear path to profitability, and recognizing the hard work that it took. Being bought at this level, to me, would be an insult, kind of be a slap in the face to the decisions that have had to be made, the sacrifices that have had to be made. Endo, excuse me, Endo even had to reduce, for example, their labor force to kind of cut some costs in order to keep the company afloat for the remaining labor force. So there had to be some extremely hard decisions to be made in order to get it to this point. And to be bought out at, $4 a share, like even $5 a share, to me, wouldn't be worth it, honestly. It would just be kind of an insult to all of the work that has been put in to get it to this point. So, as I feel like I say it every time, if I'm sitting in that room, I am, kicking over chairs, standing on the table and beating on my chest. Like, absolutely not. Like, what's it, Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings? Like, you shall not pass. It's like, absolutely not. Not at these levels. So, hopefully that's what's happening in the war room. Hopefully, that's what Endo's board is doing, what shareholders are doing, and most importantly, what management is doing to ensure that they're not getting scooped up for pennies on the dollar.
Okay. But for shareholders, people who are long Endo, I think there are definitely a lot of shots on goal that could help drive the stock higher. Share buybacks, which we'll know more about Q3 earnings, when Q3 earnings are announced in a few weeks. A potential global settlement or partial opiate settlements before earnings, or someone even making a strategic investment in Endo.
Yeah.
So there's several shots on goal that could create catalysts to drive the stock much higher. So that's it. That's basically Trump and the GE. Barbarians at the gate for Endo. Barbarian number 5 is now on the clock. So we'll see what happens. Thank you. We'll see you in another week. Thank you so much.
Take care.